When people turn to telehealth for weight loss, they're looking for real support. That's why more people are choosing OrderlyMeds.com. Orderly Meds connects you with real doctors and access to proven GLP-1 medications like semaglutide and tirzepatide. No guessing, just a more supportive experience, and all shipped directly to your door in discreet packaging. Do your research, ask questions, then visit OrderlyMeds.com/podcast for an exclusive offer. That's OrderlyMeds.com/podcast. Individual results may vary, not medical advice. Eligibility required. See site for details.
Welcome to What Happens Next, the channel dedicated to having more nuanced conversations about the next chapter of our lives and how we better plan, prepare, and take incremental action towards the life we want to live in our 50s, 60s, and beyond. Now, I'm really excited today because I'm interviewing Tom, and we're going to talk about a range of subjects, but in particular, how knowledge of ourselves, self-awareness, can be something that we might have ignored later in our careers, but we need to renegotiate and renavigate when we're thinking about the next chapter of our lives. And it's really interesting because in certain aspects of my life, Tom, I'm having to adopt a bit of a beginner's mindset, because I've started to play paddle tennis and I'm shockingly bad. But I'm enjoying the journey of just doing something new where I'm a beginner again. What aspects of your life do you think at the minute, you adopt a beginner's mindset in?
What aspect of my life do I have a beginner? You know what? I feel I'm constantly learning when it comes to parenting. And I'm constantly of the view that I will inevitably fail because I'm new to this.
Yeah, well, you know what? I mean, I think at every stage of my kids' lives, I've thought, am I doing this right? Am I doing this? I came in to just an insight into the Dames household. I came into, I'm in my home office today. I'm recording this from my home office. And my daughter was in here, who's 13. And I could hear her sobbing, just crying. So I came in and said, Sophie, are you okay? And she was watching a film called The Bridge to Terabithia, which I've never seen. And she said, Dad, I think this might be the saddest film I've ever watched. And weirdly, I didn't know how to react at the fact that she's really enjoying this film, but crying loudly. And I'm like, I don't know what to do.
The best thing that comes to mind on the hop is that she is being exposed to the emotion of sadness, which chances are she will be exposed to more often in her lifetime. And it's perhaps a good thing that she's getting to know this emotion when watching a movie, because then she learns how to deal and cope with it.
I think the interesting thing about that is, and I'm sure we'll explore that bit, is that process of change and grief and navigating loss in our lives never ends, right? It continues to evolve over time. So that's really interesting. For those who are watching this interview, don't know who you are, tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, of the many identities there are, I will concentrate on being the host of the Money Mindshift podcast and the head of a campaign that we call Money Mindshift that is sponsored by Aegon. And that is a campaign that is all there to help people live the lives they want with the resources that they have. I'm sure we dig into this a little bit, but in essence, we say that money is an important ingredient for a successful long life, but it is only one of many. And sometimes we oversee the others. So what the others are and how we can sort of consider it in the context of financial management, that's what we are wanting to explore.
And that's 100% why we wanted you on the What Happens Next podcast, because actually using money as a tool, but also ignoring our life, particularly in the next chapter, is so multifaceted and multidimensional, is really important. But I'm interested, I'm really curious about the podcast's name, actually, because what made you go from Money Mindshift? And when we're thinking about the next chapter of our lives, what needs to shift in our minds when we're thinking about it?
Yeah, I guess that's why we called it Money Mind Shift, because there are different, a number of shifts required throughout our lives. So, the money mindset and the approach to money management that you have in your 20s ought to be quite different to your 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and so on. I guess, I just use the ingredient metaphor, and that's a useful metaphor, but perhaps another one could be that you see money as fuel, right? So where, you need the fuel to get the machine or to the car going. But once you have enough fuel, then it's other things that are important as well, that you have a good engine, that you have maintenance, that you have a clear map, like all those things, right? And that's, I think, akin to what we are exploring with Money Mind Shift, that yes, money is important, but, so is your health, so are your connections, so are, what is giving you purpose and pleasure in life, etc. All those things, right? And we've got to sort of like think about those things. Exactly. We've got to think about the balance. And well, to be fair, I guess, it's balance over the course of our long lives. It may very well be that in your 20s, you focus income generation and you focus getting on the ladder and you focus, building savings muscle and a lot, all those things. And then actually it's perhaps skewing in favor of money, but chances are it shouldn't skew in favor of money throughout the long life that you're living.
It's so interesting. I mean, I've spoken about this on my episodes before, and in my own, and I'm late 40s, so I'm 48 now. In my own particular personal journey, I think the element that I probably neglected in my 30s and 40s when I was building Savello and building the business and doing the work, certainly I was building up both financial security and wealth, but I was neglecting other elements of my life that I had to make real effort into.
Yes,
the past couple of years, particularly social well-being, just friendships, and the positive impact that has on our lives. In your experience, and from the people you've interviewed and the research you've done, what areas do we often neglect, and at what ages?
I think, I think as you come out of, I have this sort of in my head, I never laid this out anywhere, but in my head, I have this, you're like in the first 18 years of your life, like when you are living with your parents, you're essentially financially dependent. Yeah. So then comes a stage where you are, perhaps briefly in survival or chaos mode, and you're craving independence, financial independence. Yeah. And this is where I think many people stop, right? There's like financial independence, right? And they have this, like, how can I become this? I mean, there's all the TED Talks and all the books on like financial independence. I think many people stop there. I think perhaps in the 20s, 30s or so, they stop there. And I would argue that it is what is becoming more important from perhaps the 30s. So this is my response to the question: when is it? 30s, perhaps late 30s or so, when people ought to discover that it's not financial independence that matters, but financial well-being. And financial well-being is different, right? Because that's not just about being independent. That's about earning, spending, managing money in line with what makes you happy, and what makes you happy today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Yeah, I love that. I find it absolutely fascinating. We've done so many interviews on What Happens Next, and I love the fact that being a podcast host allows you to do something really interesting, because it allows you to turn around to people and go, I really want to pick your brains.
Yeah.
Because you've got a podcast, you've got the perfect platform to do it without it being too weird.
Yes.
What have you learned through the journey of being a podcast host?
Yeah. So,
and what have you learned the most about like the insights your guests have shared?
I will say I'm new to this, right? So my background is research. I'm more of a bean counter by training, right? So I sort of like grew into this, and I will say I'm still fairly new. I mean, at the point we're having this conversation, we recorded eight podcasts. We have another 8 in the making, but I'm still fairly new to this. I will say perhaps also because of my background in research, my approach to getting the insights is perhaps different in that I'm very much a sort of like reader type. I sit down and do a lot of research, and I actually get many of the insights in the process of preparing for the interview. And then because you read, I mean, you will find this, Chris, when you prepare, you read differently and you look differently at what is their main point, what's the argument, where perhaps the cracks that are worth exploring, etc. That sort of stuff. Like when you go into a conversation, you look at them slightly differently. That's where I would say I learn a lot. And then I see in the recording, I see myself much more as a sort of advocate of the listener to sort of like, get the juice, get the gold moments, etc. Out of it. That oftentimes I, however, know because I've prepared. I will say though, what are then the real insight moments, I guess, are the ones when sort of like personal anecdotes are being shared, that or when I have the opportunity to sort of like sense check my reading of the argument by running past by them a personal example and say, is this it? Is that what you mean? And then, then you sort of like go slightly deeper and you get something out that, wasn't there before.
What was interesting to me is those, and I'm thinking about this quite a lot as I sort of redraft the book ready for the publisher, but that element of personal anecdote really drives a conversation.
Yes.
But actually you've got to fact check that personal I'm fascinated about what you do in terms of research. So how do you prep for a conversation you're having on your podcast?
Well, I mean, I guess the subjects we explore, they are less factual and they're much more philosophical perhaps in nature. I mean, I give you an example. We had Anne Karpf on the pod, and Anne has written a wonderful book called How to Age. That was also the title of the episode, right? And the purpose of this was that many people, we have this massive gift that as a group we're living longer, healthier lives. Yeah. But the funny side effect of this is that aging fills us with a lot of anxiety and dread. And funnily enough, like especially the younger you are, the more dreadful you are, the more dreading, the more you dread, the next sort of round birthday, oh my God, I can't believe I'm turning 30. I can't believe I'm turning 40, etc. Anyway, and she has developed this concept of the arc of life. Okay, so this is philosophical in nature, right?
It's a thinking tool, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And what she's saying is that as you age, you have gains and losses in sort of equal measure. And we need to sort of like gain that perspective of, seeing the gains, mourning the losses, but sort of like celebrating life along the sort of like along this arc. And that isn't something to, in reply to your question, Chris, this isn't necessarily something that needs to sort of like be fact checked, right? Because that isn't a fact as in, that is objectively the case. And, but it's more an approach. And what I would then do is I would ask like, okay, right, is this akin to, again, we talked about like when you are a parent, right? And, in the first 2 years, you have the baby and you can cuddle them all the time. But, then they turn a toddler and then, you can't cuddle them all the time anymore because they're more independent. So you have like a gain, but you also have a loss. Is that a kid? That's the sort of conversation I would have.
I actually think those thinking tools, philosophical ones, are really powerful when we're navigating. We're changing our lives. I like and I think there's insights from philosophy everywhere, but that's all they are. They're frameworks for you to think about this navigating change in a different way. There's no black or white, is there?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And perhaps we are oftentimes too quick to sort of default to the science, like what does the science tell us, or what do we know is objectively true, rather than like take a step back and ask, well, what is the philosophical argument in favor of this, right?
But again, I mean, we often live in a culture where you're right, I'm wrong, and actually the reality of the world is there are a lot of greys. There are a lot of bits in the middle. So where do you think we need to have better, more nuanced conversations when we're thinking about the next chapter of our lives? Where do we need more nuance?
Sorry, Chris?
Where do we need more nuance? Where do we need to appreciate the shades of grey in the next chapter of our lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you've just said there with regards to there's a lot of unknown. There are many unknowns, and exploring the unknowns, and being mindful that there are the unknowns, that there are perhaps established ways of thinking, and as a result, there are unexplored ways of thinking. I think that is something. I guess again, as a sort of example, but I've so similar age, to you. I'm 44, right? You're sort of like, take it perhaps for granted that this is, sort of like peak earning potential, and that this is where you really got to maximize the benefit most from the work you can do. This is when you're fit, when you're healthy. I don't know. I mean, there is of course a kernel of truth in this, but there's of course also the flip side, which is that we live more complex lives nowadays. It's not this sort of 3-stage life; it's a multi-stage life where you have more transition points. You can be productive at different points in your life. It doesn't have to be at midlife. So that's an example, right? Of
shades of grey.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think, and I speak about this also in my book, like in terms of money mindset, so it's important to understand your money mindset. But I think the point here is not to say that your money mindset is wrong, right? It's more to sort of like accept that, it probably helps you in a way, right? This is your way of dealing with it, but there will be a kernel of truth. But also be mindful that there's a flip side, that there's that there's another side to the argument that is also true.
And I think it's really interesting that old model of learn, earn, and then stop.
Yes.
I think for many people, they look at that as a model that doesn't suit what they want in their own individual lives. And if it works for you, great. But I think actually challenging that model and saying, if this isn't working for you, you have got other options. And
exactly.
You get to design the life you want to live.
Yes, exactly.
It's really interesting, isn't it?
Exactly. It can be both liberating as well as a threat at the same time. So,
I had we do a monthly event at Savella where we get a bunch of professionals together, and I write a case study once a month, and we explore the case study. And one topic that came up in last month's case study when we were talking about this is that concept of the paradox of choice. If you're empowered to do everything,
yes,
are you then debilitated because you're like, well, what do I do? I've got all the choice in the world. How would you navigate that from your research? What are the tips, tools, and techniques? If retirement or the next chapter of your life feels overwhelming, what can people do to think about the sort of natural next step?
Yeah. So this goes to the core of the argument that I develop, that we sort of explore also with Money Mindshift, and that is that self-knowledge is a type of asset class. Yeah. So I think, like when we think about like asset classes, we are very quick to point out property is an asset class, your income is an asset class. And, sociologists in the 80s came along and they would have said, well, your education is an asset class, your health is an asset class, who you know, etc. But I would say what you know about yourself in terms of, money mindset, which is briefly talked about that, but also in terms of what you know about yourself, in terms of what makes you happy, right? Like what gives you a sense of purpose, what makes you feel competent, what makes you feel worthwhile, what makes you feel useful in everyday life, right? These can be really banal situations. And at the same time, like what is it that gives you a sense of pleasure and joy in life, right? What gives you gratification, what gives you relaxation, etc. And these are really, they're big questions, but you can begin quite simply by just looking at last week or last month. Like, when did I really feel as though what I've done was useful, made me feel competent, right? When did I feel really relaxed? When did I feel really happy, etc. Right? So you can just ask yourself those questions, I think, as a starting point, and I think they will be useful guides towards, well, what is it I want to do? Like, what next? Yeah. So based on what makes me happy.
And I love that idea. And I think just working on that, I think we really, at What Happens Next, we really like the idea of that hedonism, eudaimonism, and charonic well-being. So I think if I was talking to somebody about that, the 3 questions that I'd probably encourage them to think about is, what did you really love to do? What gave you purpose and meaning? Like the incremental thing that gave you purpose and meaning last week. And then how did you experience awe? And always the interesting one for me, and we had a guy called John Dunkley on the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know him.
Great guy.
Yes.
I said to him, in terms of awe, I'm not religious, and I get that people who are religious get a lot of community well-being from the connection they make with their religion, but also awe from their perspective on life. And he made the interesting point that the last time he experienced awe was when he was with 60,000 people at an electronic dance music concert going, this is amazing. Yeah. I think I've experienced music and the connection to music in a way that's given me awe, but also nature, like swimming, walking in nature, walking in the forest, those sort of things. So I think that hedonism, what's fun, what gives you purpose and meaning, and how do you experience awe is a really good start. But if we're on this journey to get more self-awareness, what else do we need to think about?
So can I just pick up one keyword that you said there, Chris, and this is experience, right? And this is, so I think this is really important, because I think we are very quick to say like what makes us happy and what makes us feel competent and useful, etc., because it sounds good. Yeah. So, and that's that old difference between evaluation and experience, right? So so I have a friend who works at the University of Edinburgh, just as an example. She works there, and she says always like how much she hates her job, essentially, right? Because she's like, I'm responsible for the supply chain management of the lab. It never goes. I don't have the money. I've got to write grant applications all the time. The students are not interested in what I say, blah, blah, blah. So it goes. And then she says, but what can I do, right? I'm an academic. I love my job. And this is where you have this stark contrast between, what you experience day in and day out on the one hand, and then how you evaluate it on the other, right? And I think this is I think this is where you want to start, right? You really want to be thinking about, well, the experience in my everyday life, right? Not how does it sound, not like how do I justify it, or how do I, by the way, this goes to anything, it goes to work, goes to social relationships, goes to hobbies. I mean, I've been guilty of saying, I love playing the piano because it's sort of, instills my creative spirit. But actually, the experience is just like, I can't find the time in the day. By the time I do it, I sit down, I'm actually, depleted of energies. I don't really enjoy it, right? It sounds good. So, that's another example. So anyway, but that's what I would say, as a starting point.
What should we focus on? Their lived experience or what we think? So at the minute, I'm spending a lot of time writing the What Happens Next book. I'm 50,000 words in as I speak to you today, and currently working to make sure that the book adds as much value as we can to people thinking about that next stage in their lives. Now, the book's not ready yet. It won't be out until sometime in 2025. I'm working hard to get it finished. But what you can do is sign up for the book waiting list, so you're one of the first people that gets access. You can simply do that by visiting whathappensnext.life/book. Join the waiting list today, and you'll be one of the first persons to get access to the book and some extra goodies when it comes out. We should focus on how it really feels, right?
I think so. This, all I'm saying here, by the way, has been heavily influenced by Professor Paul Dolan, who is a behavioral scientist and happiness researcher at the London School of Economics. And really, I guess what he would probably suggest is almost like a diary, where you look at like, how did you spend your day? And, up until 8 o'clock, what did you do? Up until 10 o'clock, what did you do? I don't know. And it could be quite detailed.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Here's the bit that I'm trying to square in my own head, right? I do things that I enjoy, but I also find really frustrating.
Such as?
I mean, I'll talk about work in a minute because I think work's a really interesting one.
Yeah.
But let's take, and I seem to be bringing it up at every What Happens Next interview at the minute, paddle tennis, right? I've started playing. I really love the social side. I really like when I make incremental improvement. But actually, I get annoyed at myself quite a lot as I'm on that learning journey.
Right.
So is frustration a way? I mean, look, it might be I need to get a bit more self-aware. Is frustration part of the journey in learning something new? And do we need to, particularly if we're in our 50s, 60s and navigating what happens next, what happens next looks like for us, do we need to go through this element of frustration and pain to get to the other side?
I think you do. And was it not also John who on your podcast said you want to be stretched, but you want to be stretched just to the right degree. So you don't want to be like overstretched. And I think this is the case here. I would say, by the way, it isn't just about pleasure, right? So it isn't just about feeling joyful and relaxed and gratified all the time, right? It is also about the other side, which is, feeling competent and useful and contributing something. So I would say, when you have these moments of frustration, chances are you're probably frustrated because deep down, like you see you're onto something, right? You're seeing you're building a competence in something. Perhaps you're frustrated because, it isn't going as fast as you wanted to, etc. But deep down, probably speaks to your sense of, I'm actually, quite confident.
Yeah, making incremental progress.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So, I guess, what I would do here is I would, and this was another great that I gathered from Neil Page on the podcast when I interviewed him. And he spoke to the notion that emotions are data. Right. So they literally are, right. So they're sort of, you can like physically capture them and grasp them with fMRI scanners or whatever visual devices you would be using. But emotions do exist, right? Yeah. And the fact that they exist also just, they try to tell you something. And then, the way to work with this is to ask yourself, well, okay, what do I realize here? Like, we said here with your daughter earlier, when it was sadness. Now, here you feel frustration, or perhaps you're feeling overwhelmed, right? I think, if you first are able to name what you're feeling and B, take the time out to reflect, well, what is this telling me, right? And then, and how might this be useful? How might I be working with this? And I mean, very quick sort of like diagnosis from a distance. But, I would say actually, because, you feel frustrated because you're on a journey of developing a new competency. And as a result, right, this is a good thing. Maybe something else, only Chris. But, the point is you work with it. And I guess, then the third thing is, because it is just an emotion, right? So it is there. You want to work with it, but you can still say, I'm in charge.
Yeah, I feel like choice, right?
Yeah, exactly. I notice you overwhelmed. I notice you frustration. I notice you, I don't know, guilt, shame, whatever it is. I put you to the side because I'm in charge.
But this is the interesting thing. I mean, that's where the philosophy for me really works well, because then I can think about the Stoic philosophy of focusing on what I can control.
Yes.
But also the Buddhist philosophy of being like water. Don't react too harshly. Let's understand it a bit more. And practically for me, that journaling helps me. As you said, taking the time to reflect,
Yes.
and then seeing how that fits into my life is really interesting.
How are you? Can I ask you a question very quick, Chris?
Okay.
How do you do it? Like, do you have you got a time protected where you do this, or is it like the last thing you do before you go to bed, or like on a very practical level?
10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night. I start off with a practice that helps me realize how lucky I am every day. So the first question I ask myself, just because it starts my day off in a really good way, is what are the 3 things I'm most grateful for? And then I've got a little element about productivity. What do I want to achieve? And then I've got this sort of free writing bit where I go, okay, what's on my mind right now? And that bit, and I don't know if you feel this way, Tom, but when I write, nobody's gonna read it. I'm never gonna show it to anybody. But I'm really honest with myself. That cathartic process of putting something on paper really helps make my day.
And I bet that just the process of articulating it, finding the right words is
100%. And you know what's been interesting for me? I've spent a 10-minute period writing something out and then deleted it because it's not actually how I feel. And I've realised halfway through that, no, that's not what I'm thinking. But you say that having a habit that allows me to reflect on what's going on.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good.
It's been a really big part of my life.
Yeah.
The other thing that I was going to talk about, and this is really interesting, like going back to your friend, that work element. So I'm fortunate. I run my own business. I've got a bit of autonomy in terms of how I spend my time, and I'm really appreciative that not everybody's got this. But for me, I get the chance to look at how I spend my time and go, what do I enjoy?
Yeah.
And how do I do less of the elements that don't give me that purpose, meaning, and enjoyment? And how do I remove them? I get completely that not everybody's got that autonomy, right? So, but if they haven't, how do you think, Tom, they can get a bit closer to a working life they enjoy and gives them purpose and meaning?
Yeah, I think if they did something like that, I mean, like on a Sunday afternoon, like look at the week ahead, look at what's up and like work out, what is it that you're looking forward to? What is it where you go like, oh my God, this is due again, whatever, and work with it. Absolutely, I think so. To the point of what we just discussed, right? There are insights in this, and you want to work with it. So I think also what may be good, what will be a good exercise to do is a reflection on what your centers are. I call it your centers, call it your values, call it your. There's different words for it, but I like this is quite old, but Steve Covey of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about the different, some people are family centered, some people are wealth centered, some people are money centered, some people are community centered, etc., and so on. And be mindful of that, right? So assuming that you're not in sort of like financial chaos or survival mode, but you're sort of relatively stable, perhaps in growth stage or so. Try to figure out like. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Financial liability plays a role, of course, as well. But that is a third component. Yeah, but these are questions I would suggest you ask yourself. Yeah.
I'll tell you what else is interesting, and comes back to that self-awareness element. I think if we're living as we know we are, longer, healthier lives, and it goes back to what we spoke about before about that sort of old model. I've been having a lot of interesting conversations with clients about how work plays a part in their life in the future, and actually for a lot of them, they're considering work's really important to them. what does work give us, and how do we manage our environments and look at work as a positive as opposed to something that we had to do, and how do we find work we love?
So absolutely, I can see it. I know the argument, and the many people would say I never retire because work is too important to me. I will say, by the way, I worry sometimes a little bit that this argument is especially pushed by people who are perhaps more work centered. And many people are. So, are you family centered? Are you work centered? Are you community centered? So yeah, exactly. I think a useful exercise I find we developed at Aegon, actually in partnership with the University of Edinburgh, was one where it's a very simple framework where you ask yourself, it begins with a simple question. You ask yourself, like, here you are, like in my case, here I am, aged 44. What are you glad you did? Right? So, what are you glad you did? And then you leap out 15 years. So, here I am now, aged 59. And what will you be glad you did? What will I be glad I did? Right? So, what's happening here is you're engaging a part of the brain that's called the prospective brain. So obviously, as humans, we can visualize the future.
Yeah.
And once you've trained that a little bit, you can go through like different components of your future self and ask yourself, what are hopes and fears in relation to health, in relation to wealth, in relation to purpose, or call it work, in relation to, family, and in relation to like wider well-being. Right. Yeah. And I think this may be a sort of like fast track to answer some of those questions around, what is the importance of work? It may be that you're saying something like, well, at age 59, I hope that I'm still able to like climb, I don't know, Ben Nevis, whatever. I can still hike. I can still go for a hike. My fear is that if I work these crazy hours, I won't be able to do that anymore, right? Because I found out.
The challenge, isn't it? The challenge is like work. Individuals who are primarily work focused.
Yes.
There's a trade-off potentially.
Yes.
Of how they spend their time, and managing that trade-off by thinking about the future, as you say, is important.
Absolutely. Trade-off is a really, really great keyword here. So, and I think, and this is also why, no one has the answer, right? It's a trade-off between work and family, between happiness now, happiness in the future, financial security now, financial security in the future. These are all the trade-offs, and the reason this is so hard is because it's on us to work it out, right? I mean, this
is individual, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's political will that it is individual, right? I mean, like 150 years ago, well, we didn't have this problem 150 years ago so much, but let's say 50 years ago, we had a big welfare state, right? And it was kind of like the message was, well, when it comes to future planning, we look after you, don't worry about it. Of course, now the onus is on you, right? So it's about you and yourself. So like it or not, but you are in charge, right? And this is again why I think this notion of self-knowledge is so important, right? Because it is you, like it or not, who is in charge, and only you can work out like how to make those trade-offs. And we cannot, neither you, Chris, nor I can give you the answer, but we can, like a coach, perhaps give you the sort of guardrails and the scaffold, the variables you should be thinking along so as to find the answer.
Okay, so let me ask you a question on that, because I'm fascinated by this particular topic. And I get that there's a lot of fair criticism into these happiest countries in the world research.
Oh, yeah.
It is context dependent, and normally the Western countries and how we define happy is, is a bit of an open forum. But often the Scandinavian countries come out top, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at the framework for a lot of those Scandinavian countries. They typically follow a theme of social democracies where there's a bit more collective culture than individual.
Yes.
Do you think we can learn from that about how we transition in our lives, and if so, what?
I do worry about this, what we just talked about, and Nicholas Rose, who's an old sociologist at the London School of Economics, he called it the regime of the self, right? So I worry about this regime of the self.
Yeah, the individualistic nature of the UK and America, and whether it's actually good for our well-being.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I do worry that we dismiss collective responsibility and oversee the benefits of redistribution, etc. I think so. This is, to be honest, I mean, back to your like Stoic philosophy, right? I do worry about this a little bit, but at the same time,
we
can't control it exactly. So exactly. So I kind of accept that this is what it is. Right? So this is the reality. Exactly. I think perhaps the thing that we can learn from the Scandinavian countries, though, and this is, I don't know where I picked this up, and if it is true, but I visit Sweden and Denmark as a tourist in the summer quite often. So and it sounds plausible, but what I hear sometimes is that really the reason in Scandinavia people are happier is because expectations are lower. And I think that may be that. If you don't, I think the polar opposite may be the US, where oftentimes you get the message like you only need to believe in yourself, and then you may. I mean, this is like a psychologist or behavioral science. This is nonsense, right? Yeah. Believing in yourself isn't good enough, right? You need a fair bit. So anyway, but if expectations are lower, and it is okay to be average, and you deserve the support and the good life because you're average, then I think we can learn something from that, and that is of course something that is in our control. The lower.
I think there's a really big argument, Tom, to say you don't need to be exceptional to be happy, right? You don't need to be exceptional to be happy. Actually. And it's really interesting because I probably fall foul of this. My wife, Cassie, is brilliant at turning around and going, you do realise how lucky you are. Do you know what I mean? It's that element. And I think actually having other people in our lives to frame it in a way where you go, look what you've got, is really interesting. I absolutely agree. Self-awareness doesn't come for some of us, or actually for many of us, easy. So how do we get better at getting more self-aware?
Yeah, so I think something that you've done, that you described there, how you do it, I think is really good. So you made a habit out of it, right? So you build a bit of a routine out of it, around it, and of course the good thing then is that when it's a habit, you don't question it. You just do it. Yeah.
Just do it, don't you?
So exactly, and that's very good. I mean, like from a behavioral point of view, right? That's really good. Another thing you've done there, of course, is by sharing it, right? By sharing the commitment to it, you're not only committing, you're also making it a social thing, right? Yeah. So now like you're kind of like building a little bit an environment that sort of nudges you now to really do it, right? So I think this is, if you're new to this, if you're wanting to do this, right, then sharing with your partner that practicing gratitude or practicing self-awareness, etc., is something you want to do. By sharing it, you make it a commitment, and then perhaps you get the environment where, as a result, this is being facilitated. What I would say, and this is the hint in your question there, Chris, that the problem is, of course, that the challenge or the forces to sort of disable us, right? To disable this practice, they are massive, right? Yeah. And I'm just thinking, like, the way the news work, the way online retail works, the way phones work, etc. So we have, what I'm saying is there are so many forces like competing for our attention, right? That focusing the thing that really matters is really hard. I love it, by the way, in the English language. you say you pay attention. Yeah. So in Germany, you would say you give attention, or you give attention, you would say, right? In English, you say you pay attention. And I think that is a beautiful way to illustrate that attention is a scarce resource. Yeah. So we've got to be economic with it. I cannot play Monopoly with my kids and answer work emails at the same time.
Yeah.
I cannot, have a conversation with my wife and enjoy the music at the same. I can't. So to pay attention to one thing inevitably means I'm not paying attention to something else. And I think this is also part of self-knowledge, to be aware of the various very clever mechanisms that know exactly how to get our attention and how to detract us from paying attention to the things that really matter.
100%. I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? I think there's so many distractions in modern life that can guide us along the way that actually doesn't enhance our well-being.
Yes.
I often think of that in terms of environments. What's in our environment and how do we manage that environment?
Yes.
I suppose the other interesting thing with that is do we need to manage our own environment from a social perspective to make sure we've got people around us who boost us and give us positivity and stuff like that? But what can we practically do to actually improve the environments we live in, to enhance our well-being?
Yeah, so unfortunately, self-awareness on its own won't do it. So it's a bit of an willpower, unfortunately, is not enough. I think you need to build that environment, as you say. I mean, one of the things I tell you what I do. I have made sure that the Wi-Fi, we have a mesh system at home, but I made sure that the mesh points, they don't go as far that I have a very good reception in the living room, right? Because just don't need it. Do I need it? No. I switched the phone off entirely on Sunday, so it's just like on a Saturday evening it goes off. And it has like my WhatsApp status says phone switched off on Sunday, and things like that. I mean, if you wanted to prevent, if you're an impulse shopper, for example, right, make sure that credit card information are not saved in your phone's browser. All those little things, right? So you can build those hurdles. I think that's what you've got to do, unfortunately, because as I say, this is a nice anecdote that I found when I researched my book. But the red circle that comes with notifications, right? Be it in WhatsApp or missed call, or anyway, this goes back to Facebook, right? It was Facebook who had the notifications actually originally in light blue, right? Because the user researchers and designers felt, well, that's on par with, the kind of brand we want to be. We want to be friendly, and this is like the color palette of, the Facebook brand. Problem was, people didn't realize, right? They didn't realize that they got a new message or that there was a reaction to something, etc. And then what happened was they turned it to red, right? So, and when they turned it to red, of course, that's like color psychology, that's,
warning, danger.
Exactly. It immediately attracts our attention, right? And now, of course, you have this blasted red button, you have this red circle, you have this everywhere, right? And this is just like one tiny example of, how they are like, how they know something about us that we don't know, right? And we've got to, and this is part of the self-knowledge, part of the self-awareness that we've got to gain. But I do think just being aware isn't good enough. You've got to make very practical consequences, such as, switch the phone off or make sure it doesn't extend.
I had mine on permanent do not disturb, so I don't get any notifications.
Good.
Which is an interesting one. And I did that after I read a book. And I think the author's Nur Eyal called Hooks.
Yes,
it talks about all of these techniques that certainly tech firms are really amazing at for their own benefit, but actually have an impact in their life.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
love a book, Tom. I absolutely adore a book. But what would be your top 1 or 3 books that you'd recommend people? So I'm going to give one as a start to 10, right?
Sure.
My book that I think I would read if I was thinking about my own self-awareness is Mindset by Carol Dweck. That's my go-to book, because I think self-awareness for me starts with that perspective on the world in terms of whether I've got the ability to learn or not. I'm pretty conscious that somebody with a closed mindset probably wouldn't read the book anyway, but that's my recommendation. I think Mindset changed, funny enough, it changed the way I parented, because actually I used to tell my kids they were smart, and then I realised actually I wasn't focusing effort and I wasn't focusing the effort they made to learn. So my book for 10 would be Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Mindset. Very good. Well, since we talked a lot about his work in this conversation, I would say Paul Dolan's Happiness by Design.
Yeah,
it's not a bit older, but it's a real good classic, and I go back to it very often. Perhaps in the spirit of philosophy, and I know we talked about this elsewhere, Chris, but I know you also like the work of Alain de Botton and the School of Life.
I do.
And one of the works I go back to often is it's a little collection of essays called What They Didn't Teach You at School, I think is the title. So it's just a really nice sort of overview of all the things,
I think the School of Life in terms of content is 100% worth looking. I mean, their YouTube channel's good. The book's good. I've seen so many interviews of Alain de Botton where you go, "Oh, that's interesting. That's a really perspective. I love it."
Exactly.
So I'm going to share one, and again, this goes back to the habits and practice stuff. One that I really like was a book called The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. And I've actually stopped doing it this year, but in previous years, it's broken down into 365 Stoic lessons.
Oh, wow.
And actually, you just read a paragraph a day, and it gives you an interest in thinking habits. I really like that model of going, I'm not going to read 5,000 words, but I can read a paragraph, and it gives you a bit of an insight into other areas. So last book recommendation, Tom, what would your third one be? So we've got School of Life, we've got Paul Dolan's book. What would your third one be?
In the spirit of balance, I throw in a novel. Because I do think, novels are also underrated. And I think oftentimes, the big questions that we're dealing with, they're oftentimes actually being better answered or better dealt with in a novel. And you know what? The one... I'm reading a good one now, but I'm not sharing that because I haven't finished it, so I can't quite recommend it yet. But, the one I enjoyed was Margot's Got Money Problems or Money Trouble. Ruby Thorpe, I think, is the author. And this is a story of a young lady who becomes pregnant from her college professor and who is forced into producing adult content. She isn't quite forced, but given the circumstances, it was a decision that made sense to her. And as a reader, you can kind of sympathize with that decision. And there's a lot of, she's dealing with, of course, a lot of the, prejudice and, the judgment of the community, the family, and so all the sort of money mindsets and, what is and what isn't the right thing to do. But anyway, so I think there are some real good questions being asked in this book on, what isn't a good way to earn money and, what is it, how quickly are we to judge the way people earn their money, etc. All those things. So I thought that was a really good book.
I think you're right. I think fiction often gives us unique insights into life how to live it, and I think whereas a lot of us would pick up a novel and turn around and go, that's interesting, often the academic and self-improvement literature, we wouldn't. So that, like, those novels are a good way to explore some of those ideas. I love that.
Yeah.
Where can people find out a little bit more about you, the work you do, and the podcast?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect, hook up with me on LinkedIn. I mean, Money Mindshift. You just punch that into your podcast provider of choice, be it Spotify, be it Apple, Podbean, etc. All those, and you find us Money Mindshift as it's being typed out here under my picture, Money : Mindshift. And then, yeah, I've got a book. You find that on Amazon and wherever you find books. So these are the three routes to my thinking, I suppose.
And we'll put all of the links on all of the show notes. If you're watching this on YouTube or it's on Spotify, you'll find all of Tom's amazing work. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight. Part of the issue we've got when we're thinking about what happens next in our lives is having the self-awareness, having the introspection to be able to think about what the gaps in our well-being are. And we're doing loads of work at the minute with what happens next to build solutions that are going to help you think about well-being in a nuanced way when you're thinking about how it applies to your life. One of the first things we've built that you can use today is our What Happens Next quiz. It's free to do, takes about 5 minutes, but what it will do is give you an insight into the areas of strengths when it comes to your well-being and the areas you might want to improve. You can take the What Happens Next quiz at whathappensnext.life/quiz, and I hope it helps you in your journey to work out what happens next for you.